Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We are not here today to speculate on what may happen shortly in Uganda, but to confirm that we are the victory we seek and the prayer that has eluded us for so long. We are not here to lament or belabor the wrongs that we have been subjected to, but rather how to correct them. We are not here to discuss risk aversion or even tolerance, but to focus solely on risk retention. At the Uganda Democratic Federation, one of our greatest facets is the problem-oriented analytic approach geared towards a fully informed consensus, so that when we hear the enemy scream, "We shall crush them," we hear opportunity. Perish the thought that one can possess an in-depth understanding of democracy and yet go on and participate in election charades whose only purpose is to offer a patina of legitimacy to a corrupt and murderous regime. That, my friends, is insufferable. Listen, such half-baked and half-hearted approaches to democracy only succeed in covering the blood of innocent victims of boundless cruelty. At UDF, we talk and walk democracy. We talk and walk freedom. Our work is cut out. We have to bring this rogue regime down. And we are here to affirm the inevitability of our triumph, fully convinced that if together we rise and get the neck, rather the knee, of our necks, we will be able to change the whole world. What a pleasure to introduce Attorney Muviru Misoke. In him, we have a brilliant legal expert, able, eager, ready, and willing to sharpen our understanding of democracy and political communication in a way that immediately reveals a constitutional, ethical, and liberation moment. Mr. Muviru Misoke.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This conversation, as the chairman has pointed out, revolves around political communication. What by that we mean how the people communicate and even change regimes in their countries through simple methods like demonstrations, protests, and strikes, through riots sometimes, and even rebellion and insurrection, mutiny, coup d'etat, civil disobedience, and ultimately war. The value and the function of the protection of human rights, such as individual liberty and political freedom, that is, freedom of association, assembly, and expression, can be best be illustrated and their causes explained by looking at specific political reactions and historical events in different types of political systems. In the final analysis, these historical events converge into a single historical stream of human events, which dictated by the laws of history. When we explain and understand how laws of history cause major political events and the process of social causation, the contingency of history becomes, disappears almost. The politicized programmatic social theory contains that history is contingent because there is no predetermined course history is expected to take. This conclusion is at odds with our view of the universal process of democratization, which has produced specific constitutional principles responsible for the human rights revolution. The human rights revolution started with the abolition of slavery, and consequently the women's movement was born. Thereafter, the liberation of the colonized people all over the world took shape and culminated into independence movements in Africa, in Asia, and Latin America. We learn from this process that types of reactions of individuals and groups where human rights are violated have a logic that determines how or when they are employed by the members of society anywhere. It does not matter whether we are talking about the American continent in the 18th century or the Asian and African continents in the 20th century. In democratic political systems, demonstrations are the most common form of political communication between the people and the government or a specific regime in power. This is because democratic political systems guarantee the rights of the people as a sovereign to participate in their governance by expressing themselves in an orderly way through communicating and expressing their views against specific policies or conditions existing in society, which the people find undesirable and would like to find a remedy or change. The right to participate is usually expressed through demonstrations guaranteed by democratic political uh, uh, systems. Demonstrations may be traced as far as the enactment of the Magna Carta in England in 1215, when the people forced King John to sign the charter, or the Magna Carta for that matter, that is a Latin word for charter, which guaranteed the rights of the citizens of England. And subsequently, the English aggrieved about certain conditions in their lives, citing the Magna Carta as authority, did not hesitate to demonstrate or express their views openly in demonstrations which they held from time to time, even sometimes later on, throwing rotten eggs to prime ministers and ministers of the government to wake them up about the conditions in their society. So recognizing the right of the people of England to express themselves contributed greatly to political stability in England. The people and their government were generally in contact with each other, and that's what democracy is supposed to be. The forms of reaction to any regime in power take many forms depending on the problems sought to be remedied, the protection of the rights of the people who want to communicate with the regime in power, and the level of political consciousness within the population initiating the reaction or communication to the regime in power. At the lowest level, political communication between the people and the state are demonstrations followed by protests and strikes, civil disobedience, rebellion, mutiny, coup d'etat, and ultimately war. All these different levels of communication between the people and the regime mean something. They bring about change in society and in politics. Uh, Let us look at demonstrations first. The right to demonstrate is protected and international law and the constitutions of democratic political systems. Therefore, they are regarded as the basic form of expression or political communication by the people with the government about its policies or the conditions existing in society at any particular time. And examples will illustrate what I mean by all this. Oppressive regimes such as apartheid in South Africa, communist systems, uh, or military regimes, which were many in Africa during the 1960s, and the dictatorships were not conducive to this form of political communication between the people and the government. The reason is simple. The people and the political regimes which were being subjected by the people, the oppressive regimes were very repressive. The repression inhibits the people from expressing their problems to the regime. And the regime, an oppressive regime, of course, does not want even to hear what the people want corrected or solved in their society, in their system. In fact, undemocratic regimes are premised on the belief that there is no right to freely participate in shaping and influencing government policies and the decisions or policies made by government. Therefore, the explicit prohibition and or restriction of such rights in order to prevent the people from freely communicating their views with the regime in power becomes the rule. Under the NRM regime in Uganda, for example, which pretended to be to give the impression that it was democratic, even though by all standards it was not. The NRM regime was hostile towards demonstrations and other forms of peaceful expression of opinion. These NRM policies abundantly documented by human rights organizations such as Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and International Crisis. So if you want to learn more about the repressive nature of the NRM regime, you read those documents. They're explicit. What we have to note here is the fact that the movement system suppressed rather than promoted or even encouraged the people to participate in the government. In fact, NRM hostility to the protection of human rights was announced by the regime in 1986 under the policy which created the movement system of government, under which everyone was presumed to be a member of the movement system, beginning with at the village level, thereby meaning that every individual was in the movement system. And later on, of course, in the enacting the 1995 Constitution, this was consolidated in Article 269, prohibiting political activities outside the authorization of the movement system. Demonstrations were repressed or strictly regulated to the point of being prohibited or even nullified by the law itself, even though the Constitution declared the rights of the people to be inherent, and they were articulated in Article 29, but all this was a farce, nothing was real. The role of the judiciary in democratization is supposed to be weeding out the laws found to be inconsistent with the constitution or the supreme law. In the case of Uganda 1995 constitution, it was so strange that the constitution itself was the source of, under Article 269, of suppressing people and denying them their rights. Even more recently, the enactment of the Public Order Management Act practically illegally and unconstitutionally overruled a decision of the Constitutional Court in Kivumbi's case, which nullified Section 32 of the Police Act that gave sweeping powers to the police to suppress or quote unquote manage demonstrations or public assemblies by the superintendent of police, who was always also, just acting on behalf of the NRM regime rather than the people. Now, let us look at protests and strikes. If demonstrations are not permitted, the people resort either to protests or to strikes. A protest should be clearly distinguished from a demonstration. A protest is an expression aimed at a specific policy of the regime or the condition in which the people believe unacceptable within the society. A good example of protests is that of Hong Kong in 2019. Whereas demonstrations are always the demonstrations are always lawful, protests are not always lawful. As we'll see what happened in Sudan. But in any case, Hong Kong is a very good example of what took place when people demonstrated against the law which was enacted by the Beijing regime. You remember when Hong Kong became independent in 1996, it was agreed that it will become part of China. However, it was also agreed that there will be two political systems in one country. And Hong Kong was entitled to its own political system, and mainland China to another political system. But the Hong Kong protests were sparked off by a law passed by Beijing trying to punish anybody who demonstrated against the regime policy to be deported from Hong Kong to mainland China to be punished there. And that's what the protests were designed to prevent, so that the Hong Kong people would be governed by their law, and the Beijing on mainland China governing the mainland China and a different, of course, communist regime. However, let us also distinguish between protests and strikes. Strikes are an expression of disapproval policy specific under specific conditions. A strike may be organized by employees to protest working conditions, to demand higher pay, or to improve benefits at work. Protests and strikes, although very similar, are very different forms of political communication or reactions to any regime. Protests and strikes are resorted to when demonstrations are either not effective or they are prohibited. A strike often is usually lawful, whereas a protest is not always lawful. Let us look at the Sudan, what has gone on in the Sudan. And here, before I deal with the Sudan, let me send a message to Museveni. I put this question to you, Museveni, directly. If, as a black man, you lived in the US and you were discriminated against by white police officers, would you not protest or even riot in opposition to oppressive white racist policies? If you, Museveni, would you, in order to protect your dignity as a person and a human being whose rights are being violated, would you not find it offensive or appropriate to protest and against such policies? I'm sure Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, while in exile in Tanzania in 1976, cheered the Soweto students when they rioted against the apartheid regime in South Africa. Why then do you, Museveni, order the police and the army to slaughter the Baganda in Bugerere protests and riots of 2009? Who protested against your repressive policy to deny Kabaka of Buganda the right to visit his people in Bugerere? The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and the International Covenant on Social, Economic, and Cultural Rights. All these instruments protect the rights of the people to demonstrate, to express themselves, and to be themselves. These international instruments have been interpreted by Thomas Frank to create a right to democracy under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Articles 20 and 29 of the Constitution of Uganda 1995 do the same thing. Why do you, Museveni, in responding to Bugerere riots, when you addressed Parliament to condemn feudalism as the problem in Uganda and Africa as a whole that allowed colonialism to take over Africa? How? When addressing Parliament, you were regurgitating the same vile language used by your political enemy, Apollo Milton Obote, in the Common Man's Charter, when he ignorantly and irrationally and even erroneously equated republicanism with democracy and the presence of feudalism with absence of democracy. Now, let us look at the Sudanese situation. Hundreds of people took to the streets in Atbara and other cities in December of 1999, 1919, that is, to protest government's tripling of bread prices after 3 weeks shortage of and the high, very steep inflation. Food prices in Sudan were going high, too high for people to afford food. New protests erupted in Sudan to oppose the Bashir's policies. Some protesters chanted "No to hunger" in Sudan, in Atbara. They set fire on headquarters of Bashir's National Congress Party. The protests spread to Khartoum and other cities in December 2019. The demonstrators were chanting freedom, peace, justice, calling for the fall of the regime, Bashir's regime. And I think Bashir was joking, he didn't know what was coming. Like Museveni, you may not know what is coming. You think these are jokes, they are not. When people want change, they are determined to have it and they will have it. Ask Bashir, he's in prison today. In January, the 2020, the demonstrations in Sudan continued. In February, they continued. Human Rights Watch releases the videos documenting violence by security forces against protesters, including firing at them and beatings. Bashir declared nationwide year-long state emergency on February 22nd, dissolved the federal and provincial governments and appointed army intelligence officers as provincial governors. 2 days later, he swears in a new prime minister as riot police confront hundreds calling for him to resign. And he didn't realize these people were serious. In March, Bashir hands his powers to the as chief ruling of his political party to his deputy. He thought that would solve the problem. Of course, it did not. The protests continued. By April 6, thousands march again in Khartoum, gathering for the first time outside the military headquarters, chanting, "One army, one people." Bashir still didn't understand what these people were communicating to him because he's a dictator like Museveni. He doesn't understand. Museveni has even vowed that the rioters will be shot. We will deal with them. That's the language of a dictator, exactly like Bashir. But Bashir is now in prison. That's where he sleeps. That's where if he's lucky, he's given some food to eat. Museveni, unless you realize that people can be serious, and we are serious. On April 11, on the 6th day of the unprecedented sitting, the Khartoum residents, the army refused to take orders to shoot at the demonstrators, at the protesters. And I think that spelled the end of Bashir's government. Now he's in prison. He's waiting for trials for corruption, and not only corruption, but theft. He stole so much money, 130 million dollars. I bet if they took over the State House today, you will find a lot of money, a lot of foreign currency in the State House today. I bet that is true, because Museveni is a thief. He cannot rest without taking people's rights. Now, for Ugandans, let us look at the law. Uganda enacted the Prevention and Punishment of Torture Act. This law domesticated the UN Convention Against Torture. And in Section 4, a person who performs any act of torture, as defined in Section 3 of the Act, commits an offense and is liable on conviction to imprisonment for 15 years or a fine, whatever is. What is important here is that even MPs like Kyagulanyi, like Zaki, they have been tortured by the NRM regime, under Museveni's orders. Subsection, paragraph 2 of Section 4 of the Prevention and Punishment of Torture Act, which is a domestication of a UN Convention Against Torture, says that a person shall not be punished for obeying an order to undertake actions amounting to torture, cruel, or inhuman treatment, or even to enforce illegal orders by the police. Now, we know this phrase, orders from above. The law prohibits any illegal orders under the Prevention and Punishment of Torture Act. Any person in the government of Museveni's government, and they do this every day, they order their inferior, their subordinates to violate the law, violate the Prevention and Punishment of Torture Act. And the people, they are told, we are doing this because of orders from above, but the act, the section 4 prohibits this. You cannot give an illegal order to violate the law of Uganda. But even better, the Rome Statute, also domesticated into the laws of Uganda. Article 27, this statute shall apply equally to all persons without any distinction based on official capacity. In particular, official capacity as a head of state or government, a member of the government or parliament, an elected representative in any of these do not constitute ground for reduction of a sentence if you are convicted under Article 27 of the Rome Statute. Immunities or special procedure rules which may attach to official capacity of a person, whether under national or international, shall not bar the court from exercising jurisdiction over such a person, including you, Museveni. This law is going to be applied to you unless, and you are preparing to run again after amending the constitution. I don't know what is wrong with Museveni. I think he should have realized by now that the people don't like him, and he is violating all the laws he has enacted himself. He signed these laws. He signed the Rome Statute when it was domesticated into the laws of Uganda. He put his hand there, and yet he's violating these laws. Under Article 28, for example, in addition to other grounds of criminal responsibility under this statute for crimes within the jurisdiction of the court, a military commander or person effectively acting as a military commander shall be criminally responsible for crimes within the jurisdiction of the court committed by forces under his or her effective command. And we know that you, Museveni, you are in effective command of the soldiers and the policemen who violate people's rights. And you are violating the law you signed, which domesticated the Rome Statute. So the point here is that dictators don't understand anything. They are like drunkards. They are like alcoholics. They want power at any price. And like today, Bashir is in prison. And if he had any sense, he would have just resigned. In fact, he wanted to amend the constitution to remove term limits before and run again, like Museveni. These are the people. By the way, you should also remember that Museveni is the one who gave Bashir asylum of all people. So these are the so-called birds of the same feathers flocking together. There is no difference between Bashir and Museveni. However, we will take care of you. If time does not take care of you, God will take care of you. And there is no question about that. Now let me talk about riots. A riot is always illegal because it is intended to deliberately and unintentionally violate law as a means of expressing disapproval of either of the condition existing in society, bad policies enforced by the government, or unacceptable and unjust practices in society, such as discrimination, racism, sexism, tribalism. All these can lead to riots. Riots often involve the sudden eruption of violence, which is often unpredictable. Riots are rarely planned, as nobody anticipates them most of the time. Riots may begin as lawful demonstrations or protests, as in Sudan, and or strikes, and eventually they become riots. And these good riots in the Sudan have taken care of Bashir. They should take care of Museveni in Uganda. And the Ugandans should wake up. They think that, oh, somebody will somehow, come and liberate you. I remember when I was still a young man, young boy for that matter, when Kabaka Mutesa escaped narrowly death and he went to Britain. We were told that the emperor of Ethiopia was going to come with the planes and bomb Obote out of power. This was fiction. Nobody can, come and bomb, nobody bombed Obote. But Obote, of course, was overthrown by Amin. Museveni today does not imagine that he can be overthrown. But I send a message to you. You will be overthrown if you don't leave power peacefully. And there's no question about that. Now, as to riots, there are some examples I can give you, like the 1919 Chicago riots. These riots were caused by racism, discrimination. A young man, black man, was drowned at the beach, and the people took the law into their hands and started fighting. And these riots, they happened between July 27th and August 5 of 2019. Within that short period, 537 people were injured, 38 were killed, of whom 23 were Black, African Americans, and 15 whites too were killed. But the thing is, it woke up people. People woke up. The racists woke up, and the Black people also woke up and said, we have power. We can do something about our condition. And it did happen. But the governor of Illinois set up a commission to investigate or to inquire into what happened and how to solve it. I will read you two paragraphs of this amazing report. It says, the relation of whites and Negroes in the United States is our most grave and perplexing domestic problem. It involves not only a difference of race, which, as to many immigrant races, has been happily overcome, but wider and more manifest differences in color and physical features. These make an easy and natural basis for the distinction between discriminations and the antipathies arising from the instinct of each race to the presence, to preserve its type. Many white Americans, while technically recognizing Negroes as citizens, cannot bring themselves to feel that they should participate in a government as freely as other citizens. And this is the last paragraph, which can shock you. if you have any sensibilities. It says, countless schemes have been proposed for solving or dismissing this problem, most of them impracticable or impossible. Of this class are such proposals as: one, the deportation of 12 million Negroes to Africa; two, the establishment of a separate Negro state in the United States; and three, complete separation and segregation from the whites and the establishment of a caste system or peasant class; and lastly, four, hope for a solution through the dying out of the Negro race. Now, this is in the United States, supposed to be a democratic political system. But these problems, that's why I'm trying to tell you about the communication, democracy, and the political communication between the people and the regime. This paragraph I've just read was proposing, one of the proposals was that of apartheid, which was already, going on well, at the beginning of apartheid in South Africa. And they thought that was in itself a solution. So, but these riots, the 1919 riots, they did wake up people. They woke up the white people, and they woke up the black people to fight for their rights. And the rest is history. What do we learn from the Soweto riots of 1976? The Soweto riots in 1976 in South Africa are another good example of the nature and impact of riots on society as their communication with a specific political regime. The Soweto riots were organized, or at least initiated, by school children who resented being taught in Afrikaans language, which they perceived as a language of the oppressor under the apartheid regime. That's why I pointed out that Museveni, when he was in Tanzania, I know this because I know Museveni very well. He celebrated the riots of the school children in South Africa. But instead in Uganda, he shot and killed hundreds of people who were demonstrating and for the Kabaka's rights to go to Bugerere. What kind of a man is that? But in any case, sooner or later, Museveni, you may be resting in a place like the one Bashir is resting in, and where he is whether they give him food twice a day or 3 times a day or once a day, you will face that. You should anticipate that, unless the people take over the regime, the NRM regime in this particular country. What another example of riots that wake up people is the post-election riots in Kenya, 2007, 2008. The post-election riots in Kenya, 2007, they are a very good example to explain and illustrate the nature and impact of riots as a means of communicating between society and the political system as a whole. The post-election riots in Kenya also illustrate how African policies of centralization and politicization of the state institutions in the 60s adversely affected the process of of democratization in Kenya and Uganda also, and Tanzania and many other countries. So the thing is, the riots in Kenya post-election, right? They were triggered by the feeling that the election has been stolen. You know what that means? It means that when an election is stolen, since the people are sovereign, it means you are stealing the sovereignty of the people who have voted. And this is what is happening in Uganda. People go to vote. They are voting for nothing because sovereignty is stolen through a rigged election. And you don't have any sovereignty anymore. And in any case, when there is no rule of law, when there is rampant corruption, the people can't be sovereign. When the police is shooting at them anytime, and in violation of the laws I've just cited, about the domesticated UN Convention Against Torture and the Rome Statutes. They are ignored. They are not taken seriously. Now, what about rebellion and insurrection? Rebellion is inevitable when their rights are abused. People fight. This reminds me of domestic violence. What happens when when a man abuses his wife over and over and over? And sometimes some women get a gun and shoot the man as a solution to that's a form of rebellion by one person against abuse. And if you can justify that, what about a government which abuses people, which kills people, like Museveni's regime in Uganda, shooting people, imprisoning people, even torturing MPs, the Chabulanyis, the Zakes, and others. And you think that's a regime worth having in a country? Well, beyond that, we go to rebellion and insurrection. I am giving these different categories because they are different. Rebellion is not a riot. Rebellion is different from protesting, is different from all other forms of resentment of the policies of a regime. But in any case, a rebellion is a form of confronting the government policies, usually in order to change them. Rebellions may take the form or different forms. From the history of Africa, one of the famous rebellion is Mau Mau. I remember Mau Mau. I was a young boy, but they used to talk about Mau Mau. If you wanted to frighten somebody, you say Mau Mau is coming. Mau Mau is here. And Mau Mau, they were very, very, very ruthless, very, very, very tough people. And they meant what they meant. What caused the Mau Mau rebellion in 1952? When the colonists took over Kenya, they allocated to themselves all the good land in the highlands where the Kikuyus used to live. And they took over that land and they expelled the Kikuyus. And so the Kikuyus, Mzee Kenyatta, who was in England at that time, but returned in 1947, and started, encouraging this rebellion. By 1952, the rebellion broke out. Kenyatta was arrested, taken to Kapenguria for trial, and sentenced almost to life. But in any case, the Mau Mau rebellion is known for the bravery of the fighters, the Mau Mau. By the way, Idi Amin was in the Uganda army at that time in 1952-53, and they took him. I think his superiors knew Amin very well. When he went there, Amin chased some of these Mau Maus and shot some of them and killed them. And he was congratulated. Amin was congratulated for the way he treated these Mau Maus in Kenya. And of course, we didn't know what he was yet to come. Of course, he took over government, and it became ruthless. He started the State Research Bureau and the National, whatever, Naguru police station. But the important point here is to understand what a rebellion is and an insurrection. We should distinguish an insurrection from a rebellion, but they are almost the same. Under slavery of African American, rebellions took the form of insurrection. Slaves stole their masters' guns and confronted them. Under insurrection, male slaves sometimes raped their masters' wives as revenge. Slave insurrections were usually brutally suppressed, ferociously suppressed by the slave owners. Obviously, any slave who participated in an insurrection was executed. The best example is that of Nat Turner, who was executed in January 1831. He led a rebellion. He killed a few white people, but of course, he knew that he was going to be killed himself, and he was executed in January 1831. But this also woke up people. This rebellion, Turner's rebellion, it invigorated the abolitionist movement in the United States. So that insurrection and the rebellion, much as you may see it in a negative form, but it did contribute positively to mobilizing the anti-slavery movement. There were many insurrections in Jamaica. If you read the history of Jamaica, the slaves in Jamaica were very good at plotting insurrections. But this was insurrection, of course, because it had to be done secretly and so on. Why am I going through? These were forms of communication, of people expressing themselves about the bad circumstances that existed, whether you were a slave, you were black, you were what, and so on. Well, beyond that, you have mutiny and coup d'etat. Another form of protest or communication between the people and government is mutiny. A mutiny is exclusively done by the members of the armed forces, usually the army or the police, when members of the refuse, the members of the armed forces or the police, when they refuse to obey the orders given to them, that's a mutiny. And in 1964 in East Africa, there was a mutiny, army mutiny in Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania, and which had serious consequences, that mutiny. Nyerere treated the mutineers differently from the way Obote treated them in Uganda. Obote sent some of them on a vacation they went to England to enjoy themselves. In other words, in Uganda we were corrupt. Obote was corrupt. He rewarded the mutineers, and Nyerere punished them. And you never had a coup d'etat in Tanzania. It's the same in Kenya. The mutineers were punished, and Kenya never had one almost succeeded in 1982, but it failed. But that distinguishes the Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda. In Uganda, we had 5 coup d'etats between 1966 and 1985. Why? Because we were addicted. We didn't know how to communicate our feelings and to express them and to turn them into positive energy, as they say. But anyway, I'm pointing out that that in Uganda today, Museveni may not think so. Museveni may not believe so. But one of these days, the police and the army can get involved in a mutiny. And what do you do? Museveni, are you going to run to Tanzania again? Or are you going to do what? Are you going to, all the money stolen, like Bashir? Bashir, even he's not enjoying the money, even he's in jail. Museveni, do you want that? Or do you want to be different? Anyway, mutiny is a form of political communication, but using arms, the armed forces, either the police or the army. Now, in Uganda, I think mutiny and the coup d'etat, of course, coup d'etat, I'll come to that there, but before that, let me go to civil disobedience. A lot of people don't understand what civil disobedience means. Civil disobedience is a violation of law. You deliberately violate the law in order to change it. Martin Luther King did that. Mahatma Gandhi of India did that. Nelson Mandela did that. And they changed the system. So civil disobedience is only for the courageous, not for these they hear one noise and they run and they go and hide. Those are no good. Civil disobedience, it means a person with the principles. He says, I can't stomach this, I can't take this anymore. Therefore, I will violate the law. Ugandans in Uganda, why should you be abused by a regime that violates its laws? I've just cited you the Prevention and Punishment of Torture Act and the Rome Statute. What they say, Museveni doesn't care. He will be, one of these days, if we arrest him, we will try him just like Bashir, and he better be prepared for that. In any case, war, ultimately war. Wars come in 3 forms. The conventional war is a war in which the combatants confront each other in a specific territory or war zone. Conventional wars must, in fact, be conducted in accordance with the law of war developed under international law. That may sound contradictory, but that's the case. The wars must be fought and with observance of the laws of war. those who violate the law of war are subject to trial, like the Nazis in Germany. They were tried in the Nuremberg trials. Were about trying those who violated the laws of war. According to the law of war and the crimes against humanity, captured soldiers, for example, must be treated humanely and their human rights protected. So some of you may have, been wondering, how can war be conducted according to law? Yes, and it is necessary. War crimes and crimes against humanity committed during combat are punishable under the Geneva Conventions and the Rome Statute I just cited to you. The second type of war is a guerrilla war. In a guerrilla war, one side fights the war undercover without employing the strategy of front line, where the two sides to the war are expected to face each other. Guerrilla fighters are expected to observe the laws governing war, but the experience shows that they rarely do for obvious reasons. Take Museveni. He executed people during the Ruwero Triangle War. The Guedecos were killed. They didn't even they have the decency to tell the relatives of Guedeco where they buried the Guedeco, because they know he was shot in the head, probably from the back. And so that was a violation of the law of war right there by Museveni during the Bush War in the Ruwero Triangle War. And so the applying the principles of law to war is not a paradox. It is necessary. When you capture people, you have to treat them humanely, and you have to make sure that they are fed. In other words, you have to protect their human rights, even if they are prisoners of war. So now you understand why even if war law applies to war. There are laws that are necessary to protect people during the military confrontation. So I will just here distinguish between the guerrilla war. For example, the war fought by Bin Laden. There was no front line to that war. They could ambush anybody. They came, they bombed the planes, they ran through these tall buildings in New York, and the rest is history. But in any case, law actually does affect, is a part of the war. In any case, every war that is fought and ended usually ends either in the amendment of the Constitution, as it happened for the Civil War in the United States, the abolition of slavery led to the amendment to abolish slavery, and that was part of concluding the war. Sometimes treaties are enacted as an end to the war. For example, the end of World War II, treaties were enacted. Japan and Germany their constitutions, the Germany, the 1946 constitution of Japan was the result of the end of the war after they were defeated. They had it, and also the 1949 constitution of Germany today, which is democratic, was the result of the end of the World War. So wars may end in either amendment of constitutions or enacting new constitutions as the end of to signify the end of that particular war. And so that's important from a legal point of view. In other words, even a war is supposed to bring about social change. It's a means of communication between people and the rest of who are involved in it. So I will end here, hoping that Museveni was listening. And if he was not listening, those of you, the Valeres of Museveni, mumutwalire this message so that he can understand. He can fight, he can resist, but he will not do so forever. And we are here, we are ready and prepared to make sure that Museveni leaves power as soon as possible. Thank you for listening. And that ends my conversation on political communication and democracy.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mbiru Msoke, for yet another powerful presentation. We will now take, are you ready for a few questions?
Sure, you can.
Okay, but in the interest of time, we request you to be as brief as possible.
I'll try my best.
Thank you so much. And the first question is from the chat. Do you have any specific message for the police and soldiers that torture and kill protesters?
Of course, I think I have already actually articulated that message already, that the domestication of one of the UN Convention Against Torture clearly says you cannot, subordinate officers cannot say, we are doing this, we know it is illegal, but we are conforming to orders from above. The law is clear. That's not an excuse. You cannot plead superior orders to commit an illegal act, for example, torture or shooting people when you are not supposed to, definitely. And the Rome Statute is also very clear that even people with the authority, presidents, MPs, and others with authority, and even those who enjoy privileges, they are subject to the law in the same way and in the same manner as any other person. And specifically, I love the Rome Statute because it specifically points out that even a president has no right to violate the Rome Statute, although we know that Museveni has done it over and over. And the only way to deal with Museveni, as I suggested, is to overthrow him. As simple as that.
Thank you so much for that clear answer. And we have another question. It goes, Ugandans have tried all these methods. What else is there?
Well, Ugandans have tried and failed. When you fail, you ask yourself, why did I fail? And you have to rationally analyze your failures and understand why you failed. One of the reasons we have failed is because we've assumed, one, that somebody else will come somewhere from somewhere and liberate us, liberate Ugandans. I gave the example when I was a young boy. There were rumors that overthrowing Mutesa the second from his position, that the people thought that the emperor of Ethiopia was going to come with planes and bomb Kampala and make sure that Obote goes, is punished and stops what he was doing. But that was fantasy, that it had no basis for reality. The same in Uganda. I call upon Ugandans not to think that somebody will all of a sudden come from somewhere and liberate them. They are suffering and they are going to suffer more. They have to decide that enough is enough, and say that, like the Sudanese, that we cannot take it anymore. As I said, that's why I went through these different methods of political communication. In Sudan, riots, protests, overthrew a regime. If it can happen in Sudan, it certainly can happen in Uganda.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mr. Mobile Musoke, for yet another powerful presentation. And my take is that if Sudan rebelled, like no hunger in Sudan, then there should be no hunger in Uganda. This is our time to rise up like Sudan did. Yes. And if the Mau Mau rebelled for land, how about land grabbing in Uganda? So this is our moment and the time is now. Once again, thank you so much, and we appreciate our audience and Facebook followers. Please tune in next time. Thank you and have a wonderful day.
Thank you for that conclusion. It fits in very well.